Sure. Dawit Benti did his bachelor's degree in architecture and urban planning in 1995 from Addis Ababa University and his March degree from Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, India in 2002. He is teaching theory and contemporary architecture at the master's program at EIABC, Addis Ababa University. He is interested in contemporary Ethiopian and African architecture. Together with David Rifkind and Jürgen Strohmeyer, he curated an exhibition entitled Post-Millennial Architecture in Ethiopia at the Goethe Institute, Addis Ababa, the Miami chapter, Miami, and the University of Florida, Gainesville. He is a practicing architect and a manager at Prospus Design Building Place in Addis. His works include the design of media complexes, apartments, healthcare facilities, residences, and hotels. He regularly writes and speaks about Ethiopian architecture and heritage buildings in Ethiopia. He is also an admin at social media groups that focus on Ethiopian and African architecture and urbanism. Please let us welcome Professor Dawit Benti.
Thank you very much. I will directly go to the lecture. It's a big honor to be able to speak about Africa, the continent that I live in and that I love very much. So it's with a big joy that I do this one. It's a little difficult to talk about a huge continent in just a matter of 30 minutes, but I'll try. So how to engage with African cities, thinking through the lens of multiplicity and sustainability. So this is the content. I'll first talk about African facts. So I have more than 100 slides, but most of them are visual. So I will quickly go through all of them. So we'll discuss first the African facts. Then we will see the continental geography, and we'll check how smart we are regarding the details of the geography of the continent. Then we'll talk about how the cities emerged. As we will shortly see, cities are still being founded, being started from scratch. Then we will try to cover how they're started. Then we'll talk about challenges. Then we will see a contemporary and sustainable system. Or we may say, what about the future? And finally, should we go for a smart or dumb city? Excuse me, Addis is very cold now, so I have to clear my throats from time to time. African facts. So we know that human beings started in Africa. And we do have civilizations, so some of them span millennia, and some are like more than a few hundred years old, but we can kind of group the African civilizations into these 3 or 4 groups. We have the West African, the Ethiopian on the east, and the Bantu states on the south, and the Maghreb or the North African on the north of Africa, that is adjacent to the Mediterranean Sea. So these are African civilizations, and when we think of cities and settlements, we can think of the ancient human settlements that were complex enough to be called fully fledged cities. So there is these words, sub-Saharan Africa. we'll always talk about sub-Saharan Africa, but it is nothing but Africa minus 6 or 7 states. So we have about 54 states in Africa, but when we think of sub-Saharan Africa, it's just below the Sahara Desert. Some of it might include even the Sahara, but we talk about sub-Saharan Africa. I'm not a very big fan of this word, but yeah, it exists in the texts. And we do have regions for the sake of divisions, and it's adopted by the African Union. So almost always we have these kind of 6 regions, but sometimes we lose Sudan to the north, and we have like Zambia to the center, or Namibia or Angola to the center. So it depends, but I have adopted this kind of regional division of Africa, adopted by the African Union. On the left, we have languages. So we start from the top, we have the Afro-Asiatic, and then we go on to the Bantu and the Khoisan. So these are language divisions. And on the right, we have climatic divisions in Africa. So the majority of the climate falls into the desert, that is the Sahara, delineated by the orange color. The light green is the savanna, and the dark green is the forest. So, and on the left, this is the rainfall map. So you can see that it's fairly distinctly distinct on the African map. So we have the tropics receive a lot of rainfall, and the darker blues indicate the highest amount of rainfall, annual rainfall. So we see that the Sahara is fairly dry. It's less inhabited by human beings. So the Horn of Africa, the extreme Horn of Africa at the tip of Ethiopia and Somalia is also very dry. And on the southwest, also the Kalahari Desert is also dry. Otherwise, we see a degree of blue. And at the top, at the Maghreb, where we have a kind of a good distinction, we also have a kind of a mild climate. And on the right is the land cover of Africa. So we have the greens are forest or tree covers, and the yellow ones are crop covers. So we can also see that the cities more or less follow this pattern. So cities are expected to be found on either the green or the yellow parts on the continent. So when you have these whites where there is no growth or life, we expect less cities. And next is piped water and population. So we have the data from 1990, 2015, and 2015. So in 2050, we expect to have more than 1 billion urban population in Africa. At the moment, it's about, in 2015, it's 201 million population, the total African urban population, but we can see that the blue is piped water on premises. So there is a kind of a stress, the absence of piped water for our urban population. When we look at the economy, we can see that the blue stands for high income, above $12,000 or more. And on the extreme side, the yellow is very less. It's low income. So it's 995 or less per year. So Africa, in a way, falls under the low income category. So we expect more cities to really struggle in terms of economy. So when we can zoom into Africa, we see that there is a kind of a purple mark on North Africa. That means we can say that these are well-to-do sections of Africa. And at the southern tip, we can also witness that it tends to be violet. And we have on the western side, there is, I think, Equatorial Guinea, which is really blue. So its economy, at least so far as the GDP is concerned, is very high. Otherwise, East Africa, Central Africa, and the majority of the Western Africa falls under the low-income bracket. Excuse me. Then we see, I mean, this helps us to locate where cities are and where good faring cities are also distributed in Africa. So FDI stands for foreign direct investment in global cities. So the global cities are really concentrated in Southeast Asia, Western Europe, and the United States of America. So Africa is really, and South America is really, in a way, sparsely populated with these global cities. So the green stands for FDI source city, and the blue stands for destination city. So we have very few FDI source city in Africa. That also talks about the kind of the complexity, the services sector, the manufacturing, and the global connection of African cities. It really opens our eyes. And then when we zoom in on Africa, we have this FDI between African cities. Again, the green one stands for homegrown African multinationals. And you see that it's concentrated in Egypt, Nigeria, the Maghreb nations, Morocco, South Africa at the bottom, and Kenya and Tanzania. So we can fairly say that these cities are more advanced than the others amongst Africa. So it tells us also which is a destination and a source city. Then we have a kind of strategic position of African cities. So Joburg stands very fat and big. We have Lagos, Cairo, Nairobi, and Dar es Salaam. So these are very important cities and worth considering. We can learn from their success stories as well as from their failures. So they are economically strong and very strategic in Africa. So there is this term that I found, heat maps of FDI. So you can see, so there is the total FDI, the first the map, then headquarters of FDI, high-tech FDI. But whatever the case, when you look at the total FDI, you have a very hot color on like fire on Egypt, Cairo, South Africa, Joburg, Nigeria, excuse me, and Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, and on Kenya. That is like the East African hub. So these are like foreign direct investment. These are cities of movement, cities of action, cities of production, cities of intense economic activity. It really helps us to understand where Africa cities are located. Then we have wealth of African cities, and that also falls again similarly like the FDI. So we have like billionaires, or $1 billion per city. So you have total wealth of African cities in 2017. So you have Cairo is like $150 billion. Joburg stands B. Then you have, so these are very important cities. It just talks economics, talks about the money. Then we have the consumer markets. Again, this FDI economy, money falls into the similar places in Africa. So Central Africa is weak, and West Africa, except Nigeria, is also weak. East Africa, except Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, is also less represented, I would say. Then we have density. It's a very important thing. On the left, we have each region represents 1.5 million inhabitants. So look at Libya, for example. Almost all of Libya has very small density. And if you come to Ethiopia or around the Great Lakes, like around Lake Victoria and Joburg and Nigeria, southern parts of Nigeria, it's highly dense. So those small areas are equivalent to the bigger areas. So one region contains 1.5 million people. So cities, again, they are really following, we can see, money and capital. Again, on the right, you have population density. So again, density is very high. So these are similar on density and on 1.5 million per people per region. So we have 54 countries, 38 are coastal countries. That means they have access to the sea. That also plays a role. Ethiopia, where I am from, unfortunately, do not have the coast. But again, not all countries on the coast have their capitals, although they have their coastal and important cities. Not all have their capitals on the coast. So 38 countries have coasts, 16 countries are landlocked, 12 countries have coasts, but their capitals are not coastal. So we can say 26 of the African countries' capitals are coastal cities. So it's important to understand that coastal cities are very important so far as African cities are concerned. It's always good to consider coastal cities. So although the Kenyan capital is not Nairobi, Mombasa is very important. So although Joburg is important for South Africa, Port Elizabeth and Cape Town and Durban are very important. So the same is true for all coastal nations. So I give example, so I keep on giving example for the cities that I'm mentioning. I'm looking at my time because the screen is maximum. I have to look at my phone. So we have Luanda here. It's a coastal city, colonial city, and it's Luanda in Angola. Yeah. So you can imagine it has 10 million inhabitants. So 1/3 of the cities of Angola live in Luanda. That means its infrastructure is lagging behind the vertiginous growth. So it's growing in leaps and bounds horizontally, but it's not able to accommodate everyone. So the infrastructure growth is lagging behind. So we have the muskies, or in Portuguese, this is a word in Portuguese for the slum settlements. So these are like baggages from the colonial past. So it's a colonial and coastal city. So this is the Bay of Luanda, Angola. So you can say this is in Nairobi or Copacabana, Rio de Janeiro, or Rio or Florida, Miami, sorry. So it could be anywhere when you look at it. But then that is deceptive again. Again, it could be deceptive also. It could also be a very interesting thing for the people who are living on the slums. So this is the bay that I've shortly shown you, but these are the quarters that are distinctly shown. So this was the bay has the colonial center, the very important, interesting, beautiful, immaculately kept, maintained city center. Then we have, so what was that word? The musky. Anyone who knows Portuguese will help me, or local Angolan Portuguese. So yeah, so these are the slum areas, the squatter, the informal settlement. So be it. I mean, if the people have the time, so this dichotomy, like in Brazil, the Rocinha and the Copacabana kind of dichotomy always exists in each and every of the African cities. So you have the very informal settlement, unplanned, and that was not sanctioned by the government. that was informal, it has always got its parallel in the central, very formal part. So many of the city, the slum dwellers might come and enjoy the part that is, although it's not so accessible, although when it's gentrified, it really does not invite, or it could be very expensive for those families. It might give a respite or a kind of a break for each one of the city dwellers. So I'm trying to compare what they look like. So this is a coastal example, Luanda. And here is Agadir, and medieval Moroccan city. So it was totally destroyed by an earthquake in 1960, but it was later built with strict seismic codes because it is very agreeable. It has very mild, agreeable climate. It is a touristic city. So it was quickly rebuilt, and it has revived. And it just rebuilt itself totally from scratch. So this is how it looked like. So it's good to know that some cities are rebuilt again. This is how, tourism is a backbone of many of the Maghreb cities, and sub-Saharan African cities are also trying to take a pie from this global industry. So the largest cities in Africa, so we have Lagos and Kinshasa and Cairo, and it's in millions. So when is Africa going to be urban, part of the urban population, when it is 50% of the total population? So North America is shown by blue, and it reached 50% urban. It surpassed that threshold in 1930, and Europe passed it in 1950, and Latin America and the whole world in average passed it in 2000, kind of 7, 8. Literature has it like that. And yellow is Asia. So Africa went past that threshold before 2014. So that is when more Africans would be urban than rural. As we speak, we're more rural than urban. So again, it also mirrors the economic scenario, which nations are urbanized. So on the north and on the south and on the east, again, are more urbanized than the east and the center, and than the extreme west. So Libya is like 80% urban. South Africa is 66% urban. Ethiopia is one of the least, like 21% urban and more rural. So it also shows that the economy is also agrarian when you have rural population. That is clear for sociologists and developmental economist people. I'm an architect and an urban planner, so I might not talk a lot about that. Again, although the degree of urbanization is decreasing, sub-Saharan Africa is still above 4% rate of urbanization. And again, a population change. So you see, so when Europe and Russia are having a negative population change, Africa, Central Africa is growing above 3%. So Africa, we see in 2100, Africa will have few of the biggest cities. So Lagos would be like #1 globally, followed by Kinshasa, and Khartoum will be around 4th. Maybe Mumbai will get in, but this is unprecedented. So 2010, these images will show you how African cities basically will take over the whole world. So Lagos will have in 2188 million people. Are we preparing for them? I'm not sure. It's a little scary. Then second will be Kinshasa. Third will be Dar es Salaam with 73 million people. Now Dar es Salaam stands at 6 million, but in 2100 it will be 73 million. Then four will be Mumbai. So that is the Africa that we're talking about. So 38 of the 100 most populous cities will be in Africa. Are African planners prepared is the question. So Lagos is projected to become the world's most populous city by 2100. Yeah, so everyone else is declining. So an example is North American city, Houston. So it is now the fourth most populous US city today. It will leave the top 100 before 2100. So you have this data. Then an interesting map I have is like I adopted it from the famous architect and planner David Adjaye. So he divides Africa into 6 interesting parts. So we have first the desert, and we have 4 cities in the desert: Cairo, Nouakchott, Djibouti, and Khartoum. Cairo is very important. And Maghreb, we have 4 cities shown by the red color. And Savannah cities are 7 cities. So Nigeria has Abuja in the Savannah belt of Africa, and Lagos is in the forest part. Then we have the Sahel, like 4 cities. These classic cities: Bamako, N'Djamena, Niamey, and Ouagadougou. So Bamako has a fantastic Nilo-Sahelian, Sudano-Sahelian architecture. So Mali is very famous for its mud architecture. Then we have mountains. So Ethiopia is on the mountain, Kenya also, Rwanda also is like a nation of 1,000 hills. Then we have the Atlas Mountains on the Maghreb. And so we have 10 cities with the mountain. And we have the majority of the cities are in the forest. So these are cities like important cities like Luanda and Kampala, Abidjan, Dar es Salaam, and Lagos. So how did the cities start? It's important for me. So I took examples from the different cities. So I'll take Fez from Morocco. It's a historical, continental. It's not a coastal city, because we took an example of a coastal city. So it's Maghreb. From Maghreb, it's Fez El Bali. So it's touted as the biggest car-free urban neighborhood in the whole wide world. So it's very interesting. We can learn a lot from Fez. It has its miniature in Ethiopia, the city of Harar, where cars cannot get in. It's still medieval, an Islamic city, and very human, very beautiful, mild climatically speaking. So it has about 156,000 people. You can see this is what urbanists are talking about, walkability, livability, human scale, all the theories that we're trying to reinvent after the failure of modernism and after the introduction of the auto in the city. So this is beautiful and human scale and livable and walkable city. I took another example, historical, continental, and a Sahel example. This is Djenné from Mali. It is it is less than 100,000 people, small city, but nonetheless non-colonial, and it shows how Africans can make a city without addiction to the global addiction to cement and whatever, these things that are not sustainably adopted. This is how the Grand Mosque in Djenné, Mali, is maintained. So we have cheap labor in Africa. and they know how to build with mud. So, when the mason said, it's a very important thing. When an agama lizard sees you coming, it jumps onto a wall. It doesn't fall because it has special powers. Those powers are the same that we masons use. Those are secrets the masons say. That means lose these secrets. Now we don't easily get masons in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, that are well able to work with mud. So the skill is, we're losing it, but they have these. So you can see how people still are handy with the mud, and it's maintainable. It breathes the building. It's climatic. I give another example. It's a historical continental. It's a destroyed city. It's from the forest, and it's Benin. It's raised by the British colonialists. I mean, the whole thing is raised, and the artifacts are taken over to Europe. We're hearing talk about returning, the artifacts, but it's a city. I mean, people talk about, thousands of kilometers of walls built with mud, protective walls, and a highly organized. So this is a drawing made by a Dutch explorer in the 17th century. So you can imagine how complicated and how well organized, hierarchical, and civilized city is. Unfortunately, we don't take this one in our curriculum. We don't learn it. So I have to read about it and teach my students what these historical cities are. Again, sketches from archival materials. So we see how the cities were long. A plan, a map of Benin walls, the ancient walls. It is put in scale. So this is like the city proper. Otherwise, the whole neighborhood area is also protected with walls and moats. They say literature has it that it's even longer than the walls in China, but it's made not of stone but mud, very thick. So another sketch before it was raised by the British. So some part of the wall is left like this. On the right, we have the moats, and on the left, we still have these gigantic walls that are wide enough that still exist to tell us the story. We take another coastal colonial example, Maputo. So it is entirely built by the Portuguese. So you can see it's pre-independence images. These are like what I've used. So you have modernist and Art Deco churches. They are entirely built by modernist principles. And you see, it's like a heritage from the past. So most of African cities are built like that. And yes, so it's built on this dichotomy. So I'll give an indigenous example. This is Addis Ababa. So Emperor Menelik, after defeating the imperial European powers, he made Ethiopia a power to reckon with. So everyone rushed to establish the embassies in Addis Ababa. Then we had this settlement. So it started from nowhere. So there was nothing, and it's an indigenous, recent, as recent as 1890s, and continental mountainous city from Africa. So the image on the left is the Churchill Road again, 60s. So Addis was very modernized in the 60s, and on the right you have a very recent image of Addis Ababa. It's the Churchill Road at the city center. So we have Egypt, a new city, an example. So it's like Abuja, but it's being built at a scale that nobody ever witnessed in Africa. This is what we're going to, we're going to have in Cairo. They have started building it. There are some of the buildings are finished already. So they are built without discussion. Transparency is nowhere around. And the participatory approach that we strive to have is not really discussed. People are very critical about it, but nonetheless, it's being built in the midst of the desert. This tower is going to overtake any high-rise building in all of the world. So you know that cities sometimes are built not out of necessity, but sometimes or many times out of their symbolic value. So they could be very expensive and not feasible, but you know, the pharaohs had the pyramids. I'm not sure if they were feasible for the rank and file, you know, Egyptian in the pharaonic Egypt. So you have these ones in the desert. Again, we have smart cities. It's Konza Technopolis in Nairobi, Kenya. So do we need smart cities like that? High tech, you know, with microprocessors, digital surveillance cameras. This looks like Zaha Hadid's building in Vienna. Do we need it in Africa? Do we? So this is it, but the process has stalled. You know, these kind of magnanimous projects are, how would I say, stopped by, you know, they are struck many times. So they don't really see to be, they will not really be finalized on time. And they will be over the budget. So we have challenges. This is inequality. So we have in African cities face these challenges of inequality, the haves and the have-nots. Cape Town, South Africa, Accra, Ghana. On the right, you have large mansions, and on the left, you have squatting settlements. So these are climate change risks. These are basically because we have, most of them are like coastal cities. We have water stress, sea level rise, floods, drought, heat waves, dust and sunstorms. And those ones circled by the ovals are those which are facing multiple climate crises. So they are like multiple climate risk hotspots across cities. So how do we make them future-proof, or how do we adapt to the climate crisis? We have examples from Addis Ababa, Nairobi, Durban, Egypt, and Mombasa. One way is like greening the city. Addis is championing this one. And in Nairobi, they are owning the public green spaces to improve access to healthier spaces. In Durban, they're covering their roofs with green. And Egypt is making an artificial low-cost wetland just to naturally purify the wastewater. And in Mombasa, they're restoring the mangroves to create a better, healthy microclimate. So these are how African cities can adopt. So this in detail are the ways that African cities can adopt to the challenges faced by the climate crisis. What about an example from Kenya, Nairobi, the Lutuli Avenue? It's famous. So it's about decarbonization through pedestrianization. So you make a road pedestrianized, like in Vienna or Stockholm. I'm not sure how successful American cities are on this regard, but it's one way of decarbonization, and the impact is felt on business. So the last paragraphs or bullet says shop sales have increased. There is reduced noise and air pollution, and there is a reduction in incidence of crime. So this is a plus. So, but we're still advocating these for these two countries, but yeah, we have few months or years to go to see what's happening in our next doors come to Addis. Sustainable transportation. This is Dar es Salaam, details about population growth, but they have championed this BRT, bus rapid transit, dedicated roads for buses. So Addis Ababa made a mistake with LRT, but we later realized that BRT would be much more feasible and profitable on the long run than LRTs. So it's a very successful and amazing way of doing sustainable transportation. Finally, do we need to be smart or dumb? And do we need the ancient knowledge or know-how to live symbiotically with nature as our ancestors did in the millennia? It says we can use green and blue landscapes for low-tech ecological solutions to flooding, drainage, waste recycling, urban agriculture, and sustainable buildings. It worked for the ancestors for millennia. Why are we tantalized now with electronic sensors, computer servers, or very expensive IT support that also comes with hidden trappings of planned obsolescence? Should we do it the wrong way or the right way? Should we do it dumb? So does Africa need those towers? I bet we don't. So this is a contextual example from Makoko, the biggest floating settlement in Africa, next to the very expensive high-end Lagos and Victoria Islands in Nigeria. So this is how people are living. These communities are living day to day like this. They are fishers from around the area, and the government has no intention of, simplifying their lives, but they want to remove their stilts and, kind of clear the whole slum. But a very ingenious solution came from the famous architect, and he made this floating school. It's a very famous school. It's touted as a solution. Yes, it was a solution. Unfortunately, it failed in 2016, but again, they really learned from their mistakes and improved upon it, and they really made a structure that would stand for 25 years at least. It's all about trial and trying to improve the lives of the weak and the vulnerable. That is what we need. That is how we should go smart. This is how. I think this is the way of the future for Africans. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Benti. This was tremendously foundational and a comprehensive presentation that covered so many aspects of cities in Africa, growing cities, changing cities, grounded cities, sustainable cities, and raising key questions around what does the future of cities look like. So we have very few minutes left for some questions, but there are questions that have been coming into the chat box. So what I will do right now is to summarize a few of them. So the question of climate change and how it's impacting cities came up. And also, and I'm wondering if you can relate it, the impact of climate change on cities and the question of migration and how that may be related. Relatedly, also, I'm going to say a third theme, and maybe you can address them all together, is the question of the colonial design of cities and in which ways Africans are pushing back and creatively rethinking the colonial design of cities. So I'm leaving you with those three themes. Perhaps you can share an answer to the question of climate change as related to migration and the design of colonial cities. And feel free to put more questions in the chat box. I will try my best to summarize them.
So, yeah. So I'm not very tech savvy, so you do that thing for me. I mean, I would lose it like if I go into the chat box. So Elsa will help me with that. So, every time you try to understand the problems, you'll have more questions than answers, So that is what happens to you when you try to understand Africa. But the problem stems from our education, I learned about London, Paris, New York, the Chicago school, and about I know more about Paris than Lagos. I know more about Addis Ababa. I know more about London than Addis Ababa. So we're not told to know who we are. So I think the basis of everything is we have to decolonize, we have to. So, for example, if you come to Addis Ababa, you cannot build with mud. And it's a shame to find a book on mud written by a German expert. So it's Gerot Minke. It's very thick. You have to buy it in dollars. Where we have the expertise, we think it's backward. How could mud be backward? How could it be? I mean, it has always been there. And we're losing those people because you have to really ferment it. Our fathers, they have not put the recipe on, it's not like 3 days, you add water when in this degree, they don't know it. And when they die with their millennia-old knowledge. So we've not started to learn who we are. And you get into politics, you get into power. So you simply fit into the mold that the colonizers did in the city center. So the Novo rich will try to go to, if you are from Lagos, I've never been there. So I'm talking from my limited bookish knowledge. So you go to Banana Island, or you go to the Leke or the Victoria Island, and people are talking of the Eco-Atlantic City. Forget Eco-Atlantic City. It's not for Africa. Imagine, where do you get the sensors from? We are going to be forever addicted. It's like a human hair, We were told in Africa to wear human hair, and we're always buying it in dollars. We're beautiful as we are. Sorry for being very emotional and personal. We're told so the market is ripe for fair colors, fairing our colors. So why do we do with cement? So for me, it's stupid, this, what is Eco-Atlantic, It's stupid, utter, it's completely stupid. We don't have the finances. While, people are dying because they have no medicine and they don't know, in Lagos, you go there and you have this, face me, I face you house. And, they look at Makoko. We should think of, so I could be a leftist person. Sorry for that. I could be whatever, but backward, we're all educated, but smart cities, we need to do it the dumb way, Canada cannot do it. There is this
and the African way, especially in the African way.
The
exactly.
African way. So for all of the questions,
let me add one question related to that.
Let me finish this. For all of the questions, once we decolonize, we can do it.
Absolutely.
And we have this net camera advantage. We don't need to do it. We are preached with Hollywood when they are driving on their spaghetti connections. The African politicians think, look at all the Facebook groups in Africa. They will tell you, this is not Dubai, this is not Shenzhen, this is Dar es Salaam. Forget it, Why do you want to be like Shenzhen and Dubai?
Yeah.
I'm sorry for being emotional.
No, it means recentering African knowledge, and this is so crucial to the message of this entire workshop. So I so deeply appreciate that you are emphasizing this with emotion, and that is crucial. I'm going to summarize a related question. Two questions have come in about creative and artistic resistance, particular to the influence of China. and the way art can maybe be used intentionally around sustainability. So there was that question of what are some intentional projects that resist the external neo-colonial influence or neo-imperial influence of China and or colonizers. And that will be the last question. If you can answer it in about 1 minute, that would be wonderful.
So there is a kind of a revival amongst the educated people, you know, to make use of, to get off the addiction of cement and steel, you know. We are good so far as we wean ourselves off of that. And we have fantastic artists that are coming on the scene. And I am trying to include Ethiopian and African architecture in the curriculum. So we are pioneering that. So the next generation will really be, you know, they won't start from scratch. I think that is sufficient to say. And there are many artists, creative architects, who are saying, no, you know, no, we can do it this way. But it's expensive, time consuming, blah, 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 blah. That would be a topic for another discussion.
If I may, I would like to just add a word of thanks, you know, Dawit, for just starting our seminar today with that attitude of decolonizing and refocusing our role as teachers in terms of what is, you know, revaluing African, you know, African content. So thank you so much for your brilliant lecture. And, you know, the question is, can we use those slides? Teachers were asking if we can actually circulate those slides to everybody. Can we do that?
Yes, I'll send you my crime is I did not do, because of time, I did not do the acknowledgements.
Right. Thank you.
Thank
we
you
really
so
appreciate
much.
It. This was wonderful. Thank you so much,
comprehensive, and we
really
very much
wonderful.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yes, yes.
We
Thanks so much. And I'd like to also add
so
another.
Grateful for your presence.
I lead you for actually being here today. Thank you so much.
You.
Also,
thank you for the honor of inviting me to listen to this really erudite presentation by Professor Dawit Benti. We need to decolonize and we need inclusivity. I'm grateful. Congratulations to you all.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Professor Randolph, Professor Agnes, Leslie, and each one of you. Thank you. I'm grateful. Thank you. And see you soon. Much love and peace.
Dawit, thanks again, Dawit. Enjoy the cold weather, Dawit. Enjoy the cold weather of Addis.
And have a good evening in Addis. I know it's late on your side.
Have a great workshop and everything. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.